A new discovery was found confirming the site of the apostles Peter, Andrew, and Philip's hometown, otherwise known as Bethsaida, in John chapter 1, verse 44. This discovery, according to Cameron Bertuzzi of Capturing Christianity, is the most important find since the moon landing. Wow. Not to mention, it may even confirm Catholic claims about the early church support of the papacy. Those are some pretty big claims. But is this claim really all it's chalked up to be? Does this newfound church inscription prove the legitimacy of the Pope and the site of Bethsaida? Let's get into it. Hello, and welcome to Truth and Tradition, a channel that covers the intersection of science, religion, and philosophy. If that sounds interesting to you, then hit that subscribe button and never miss an upload. This video is an introduction to a discussion I will be having with Dr. Rami Arav. Rami is an archaeologist for the site called El-Araj, which is the other possible site for Bethsaida. For context, there is a scholarly debate regarding where Peter, Andrew, and Philip's hometown actually is. Some agree with Dr. Arav, believing that El-Araj, located 2 kilometers northeast of the Sea of Galilee, is biblical Bethsaida, while others, like Cameron in his video, think it's El-Araj, 2 kilometers south of El-Araj, right off the Sea of Galilee's shoreline. I think there are good reasons to link ancient Bethsaida to both El-Araj and El-Araj. I'm not making a claim for either side in this video. However, Capturing Christianity, a channel I do respect, has overreached in his claims about El-Araj specifically. And before we get into those claims, I want to remind you folks that this is a critique of Cameron's video, not an attack on him. I respect the work of Capturing Christianity. And so I ask that all of you watching this will be nice to Cameron and to each other in the comment section down below. Anyway, here are his claims.
A brand new discovery that may have just settled one of the most debated locations in the New Testament. Buried beneath layers of history on the north shore of the Sea of Galilee, archaeologists have uncovered a 1,500-year-old Byzantine church, and inside, a stunning Greek inscription that explicitly honors St. Peter as the chief of the apostles. The inscription directly references Jesus' words to Peter in Matthew 16:19, where he says, "I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven." This discovery has major implications for Christian truth claims, and yes, even the ongoing debate over Peter's authority.
So you'll notice that Cameron presents this news as if it's breaking news right off the press. However, the discovery was made back in 2021. Not quite breaking news, but that doesn't mean it isn't the most important find since the moon landing. While this is a matter of opinion, this is actually a quote from 1987, referring to Dr. Arav's work at El-Araj, not referring to the Mosaic inscription. After Rami Arav presented his initial findings from El-Araj, an Israeli reporter published an article covering the work, and one of the readers called his work the most important news they'd heard since the moon landing. So the quote is only 34 years late, but who's counting? Clearly not me, because I don't even have a watch on right now.
The crucial part, though, is the reference to the church as built for, quote, the chief of the apostles, and, quote, the keeper of the keys to heaven. This expression uses the same words with which Jesus appointed Peter as the keeper of the keys to the kingdom of heaven in Matthew 16:19.
Here Cameron says the inscription dedicates the church to the chief of the apostles and the keeper of the keys to heaven. These are titles likely referring to St. Peter, although we don't know this for sure. We can have confidence that a phrase like keeper of the keys to heaven refers to Peter because of a passage in Matthew 16:19. This is where Jesus says to Peter, "I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven." Additionally, early church writings affirm Peter as the chief among the apostles, a title primarily saved for him and also for the apostle Paul. However, the part that doesn't make sense to me is how you can come to this conclusion at all. When we look at the actual translation of the inscription, it reads, "The whole work of paving the diaconicon with mosaic was done by the zeal of Constantine, servant of Christ." chief of the apostles and holder of the keys of the heavenly spheres, intercede for him and for his children, George and Theophano. Now, the phrasing of this is a little difficult to understand, but basically it says a person named Constantine, and not Emperor Constantine. This guy was a church paver by trade. He was the one to pave the diaconicon in the church. And a diaconicon is just a place of worship, the church sanctuary, have you. Anyway, it says that this guy, Constantine, paved the sanctuary in the church, and then goes on to say a prayer to the chief of the apostles. Here's the quote: "Chief of the apostles and keeper of the keys of the heavenly spheres, intercede for him and for his children, George and Theophano." This second half of the inscription is a prayer to, most likely, Peter, asking that he would pray to God on the behalf of Constantine and his two children. Nowhere does it say that the church is dedicated to St. Peter or to any patron saint. In fact, based on this interpretation, it would make more sense to conclude that this church was actually dedicated to Constantine. St. Peter's name is never mentioned anywhere, and the titles that might be referring to him are not invoked as a way to dedicate the building, but rather as a petition of blessing over the church's paver. Now, the official publication of this church's inscription, which you can find in the description below, does agree with Cameron's affirmations. However, this conclusion doesn't make sense to me. If anyone from the team at El-Araj could help me understand why you came to this conclusion, that would be super great. The only reasons I could see for this conclusion is potentially because of local St. Peter cultic practices in the area and the broad tradition of Christians erecting churches in places of significance for specific apostles. In this case, Bethsaida, the hometown of Peter and Andrew. But for now, I lean on interpreting this as a plea for intercessory prayer rather than a direct dedication to Peter.
The dedication of the church's diaconon to Peter fully matches Wildebald's description. In fact, it's likely that there was another inscription dedicated to Andrew, since according to Wildebald, the church was dedicated to both of them. See also the reading of the second inscription.
This is where things become extremely problematic. Both Cameron and the blog post he goes over in the video assert that there could be another inscription dedicating the church to Andrew, Peter's brother. In this part of the video, Cameron mentions Willibald, who was a church bishop in the 8th century AD. Bishop Willibald made pilgrimages all over Israel-Palestine, and his travels are documented in the Hodo Poricon of Willibald. Basically, it's his travel diary. In a section of the writings, it mentions Willibald's stop in Bethsaida, where he says he found a church built over the childhood home of St. Peter and Andrew. He also mentions inscriptions at the church, dedicating the church to the two apostles. Now, the mention of St. Peter in one of the inscriptions found at the church in El-Araj is potentially evidence that this is the church Willibald visited. I would disagree with this assertion, but I can see why you might come to this conclusion. But to assert that there is another missing inscription to Andrew because of Willibald's account is an overstep. There are no inscriptions on site to suggest this. There's no physical evidence. Oh, except, I guess, this one? A fragmentary inscription which reads, "In the time of our Master and Most Holy Father and Bishop blank, the church was renovated." Clearly, this is a dedication to St. Andrew. I mean, it's just so obvious. Guys, you might as well give your life to Christ now, because this is just the best evidence I've ever seen. No, as you can see in the interpretation, it says, "In the time of our Master and Most Holy Father and Bishop." Let's not forget that this church was constructed in about the 6th century AD. That's 500 years after St. Andrew, so it could not have been constructed or renovated in his time. This inscription most likely refers to the region's bishop at the time of the church's renovation. The original publication suggests that it refers to either Bishop Tiberius or Hippos, who may have been bishops over this location. But to say this fragment is likely dedicated to Andrew, That's ridiculous.
So let's start with what the inscription actually says. It calls Peter the chief of the apostles and, quote, the key bearer of the heavenly kingdom.
Hold on. Is that what it says? I don't see at all where it calls Peter the chief of the apostles. This is circular reasoning. It refers to a person whose title is chief of the apostles. But by no means does it say that Peter is the chief of the apostles. To use this as proof that Peter is these titles of authority is logically fallacious. And perhaps this is nitpicking, but the interpretation uses the word spheres, not kingdom. Now, this means the same thing, but the reporter in me had to point this out.
This directly challenges the non-Catholic claim that Peter was merely first among equals. The Byzantine Christians who built this church weren't saying Peter was just another leader among the 12. They were saying that he was above them in rank in leadership. He was the chief of the apostles. And importantly, this wasn't written in Rome, right? This was found in a Byzantine era church in Galilee. And that's significant because it means Eastern Christians, not just the Latin West, recognize Peter's unique leadership.
Again, this phrase can be used to refer to either Peter or Paul, and possibly a whole lot of other apostles. The Greek word he uses, koryphē, is most often used in church history to refer to both Paul and Peter. Although, based on context and the other used epithet, holder of the keys of the heavenly spheres, I will say that the connection to Peter is much stronger. However, this interpretation has nothing to say about Peter being the first pope, or that being the keeper of the keys to heaven is a reference to apostolic succession. Now, to his credit, Cameron recognizes this.
Does this find prove the papacy? No, it doesn't prove it. Does it prove that Catholicism is true? Also, no. But does it increase the probability that Peter was recognized as the singular leader of the apostles? I think the answer to that is yes.
I think the answer to that is sure. It slightly increases the probability that the early Christians viewed Peter as a significant leader in the church. But would I point people to this as evidence for the papacy? No. There is much stronger and more direct evidence for the Pope and apostolic succession elsewhere. Now, this video has focused on the findings at El-Araj, and as I said before, this is just one of two potential locations for ancient Bethsaida. The thing I actually find most interesting about El-Araj is the fact that it solves a geographic problem in regards to the location of Bethsaida. Bethsaida is said to be a Jewish fishing village off the shore of the Sea of Galilee. Since Et-Tel was thought to be the location of Bethsaida for several decades, it was difficult to understand how it could have been a fishing village. This is because it's 2 kilometers from the shoreline. And that's where El-Araj comes in. In 2014, when excavation at El-Araj began, the evidence for Roman and Byzantine era structures were found on location. And El-Araj is right off the Sea of Galilee's shoreline, making it seem to be a more likely candidate for Bethsaida. Now, this is just one side of the debate. Another early church father by the name of Theodosius wrote about Bethsaida, describing it as being 6 miles from the city of Capernaum. However, when we look at the distance between Capernaum and El-Araj, it's too close. But do you know which site matches the distance of 6 miles? The site of Et-Tel. So at least in terms of church tradition, people thought that Et-Tel was the location of Bethsaida. Additionally, according to Rami Arav, the layers above El-Araj suggest that the Sea of Galilee covered the area in the time of Peter, Andrew, and Philip. He says that due to an earthquake in the area, the shoreline of Galilee shifted south, allowing for residency in El-Araj. Now, there's a lot more to be said about both of these sites. I'm merely just scratching the surface, introducing this debate and showing you some of the interesting ideas behind these sites. But regardless of whether El-Araj or Et-Tel are ancient Bethsaida, both of these sites tell us a lot about the lives of ancient Jewish people in the Roman era. Not to mention that deeper layers at Et-Tel show evidence of Iron Age residency, people that would have lived in the time of King David. All of these things and more will be explored with my conversation with Dr. Arav, so be sure to check that one out once it drops. Lastly, I'd like to remind everyone to be cordial, in the comment section. The last thing we need in today's world is more division and finger pointing. If you are an earnest truth seeker like myself, you know you're going to be wrong at times. Truth seeking is a journey. So thank you, Cameron, for introducing this topic to me so that I could do my own research and be able to meet some really cool people in biblical archaeology. Guys, let's show him some love. And as always, let's continue to seek solutions to life's biggest questions. Stay curious.